The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. Frederik's departure. By 1935, the vineyard had matured into quiet abundance. The rows stretched like green armies down the slope of the valley, disciplined, fruitful, orderly, just as Zuriel had designed them. Yet within his own house, a different army was stirring, the restless ambition of youth. Frederik was 14 when the summons came, an invitation, arranged quietly through proxies and acquaintances, to a military academy inland. The school promised discipline, advancement, a path carved by honor. To Frederik, it was opportunity. To Miriam, it was sacrifice. To Zuriel, it was necessity. The morning of his departure was cold, the air sharp with Cape winter. The family stood at the rail station, the platform crowded with mothers clutching sons, fathers hiding pride in sternness. Trains shrieked like steel beasts, steam rising into the pale sky. Frederik wore the new uniform with stiff dignity, his jaw set, his shoulders squared as if he could will himself into manhood before the whistle blew. Miriam held him fiercely, burying her tears in his collar so that others would not see. She whispered blessings in Dutch, words that trembled against his skin. She did not let go until he gently pried himself free, for he was determined to show courage, and she, in her wisdom, allowed him that dignity. Zuriel did not embrace him. Instead, he offered his hand, grasping his sons firmly, as one man to another. The gesture was colder, but heavier. It carried not only farewell, but covenant. "Remember," Zuriel said, his voice low and unyielding, "obedience sharpens pride, but only wisdom redeems it. Learn both." Frederik nodded. He was too young to understand the depth of those words, but not too young to sense their weight. His eyes searched his father's face, carrying questions he could not yet shape into speech questions about duty, about destiny, about the shadows he sometimes glimpsed in his father's gaze. The whistle blew. The train lurched forward. Frederik did not look back, though Miriam's eyes followed him until the last carriage vanished into smoke. Only when the platform emptied did she turn to Zuriel. Her face was composed, but her voice trembled as she said, "You fear for him." Zuriel's jaw tightened. His gaze remained fixed on the disappearing trail of steam. "I fear the war already written in his blood." Miriam did not answer. She did not need to. Instead, she slipped her hand into his, her silence a confession more profound than speech. Together they stood in the fading noise, bound by the truth neither could bear to name aloud, that their son was stepping into the current of a river older than either of them, a river whose course no parent could divert. The chronicle of the divided sons. That night, in the solitude of his study, Zuriel opened the ledger of shadows. The lamp cast its steady flame, illuminating the inked lines of prophecy and design. As he wrote, a voice from years long past returned to him. Eric's words, spoken across fire and exile. The chronicle of the divided sons, one branch righteous, one estranged. At the time he had thought it allegory, a tale for the brotherhood's dying breath. Now, watching Frederik vanish into the machinery of war, he understood. It was not parable, it was structure. It was the very scaffolding of history itself. One branch Arab, the righteous. Builders, keepers of covenant, rooted like olive trees. Another branch Anak, the estranged, ambitious, hungry, corrupted by the taste of dominion. Two currents, forever opposed, forever intertwined. Zuriel felt himself caught between them. His blood carried both. He was not purely righteous. He had known too much ambition, too much vengeance. Yet neither was he wholly estranged. He still built, still guarded, still sought covenant in land and lineage. He was a man of the threshold, standing between pillars that pulled in opposite directions. And so he wrote, his quill scratching like prophecy itself, to build until the one who remembers would come. The vineyard was not only wine, it was prophecy given soil. Its rows stretched not merely across the land, but across time itself, a pattern waiting for the day when the air of remembrance would tread between the vines and recognize the design. As the ink dried, Zuriel sat back in the silence, the oil portrait of the faceless soldier gazing down upon him. He wondered if Frederik would grow as righteous branch or estranged. He wondered if Elsa, still a child, would carry in her heart the balance Miriam seemed to embody. And he wondered if his own place between covenant and ambition was curse or calling. Outside, the vineyard lay hushed in moonlight, the fortress of vines guarding its secrets. Inside, the ledger of shadows grew another page, its words thick with the weight of inheritance. The rival moves, the vineyard thrived, but so did the whispers. By the mid-1930s, rumors moved like wind even in Cape Town. Names began surfacing in the land registry's names that carried peculiar echoes, as though drawn from the same deep reservoir of history Zuriel himself had plumbed. Families that seemed to prosper from nothing, households that multiplied without clear cause, estates rising like mirages overnight, paid for by invisible streams of wealth. To most men, such things were chance or clever business. To Zuriel, they were patterns, and he recognized them at once. The shapes of holdings, the timing of acquisitions, the way certain names repeated across deeds. It was as if the marks from his ledger of shadows had stepped into life through other hands. It was not coincidence. It was counterpoint. At an auction near Paarl, Zuriel stood among men bidding for parcels of land reclaimed from English absentee owners. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and sweat, the drone of voices climbing with each raised offer. Then he saw him, a man across the room, tall, dark-haired, with cheekbones carved like his own. The nose, the jaw, the eyes, sharp, hungry, almost feral. Not reflection, not twin, but something closer than stranger. Their gazes locked across the crowded hall, and for the span of a heartbeat, the room seemed to fall silent, the auctioneer's voice muffled, the world itself retreating. Kin, but not brother. Blood, but not ally. The man did not speak. He did not even smile. He simply looked, as though measuring Zuriel, as though recognizing in him an equal and an enemy in the same instant. Then the bids resumed, the gavel fell, and the moment passed, but Zuriel knew the memory would not. That night, back at Estes, he returned to his study. The lamplight pooled on the open ledger, its pages alive with symbols and ciphers. He took up his pen and in the margin sketched the man's outline, the hard jaw, the predatory eyes, the ghostly resemblance. Above it, he wrote only 4 words: shadow of the poisoned throne. He did not yet know the full truth of his mother's death, that poison had stolen her before he first breathed air. To his mind, she had been claimed in the struggle of childbirth, her life the price of his. But something in the marrow of his bones told him otherwise. This rival bloodline, this echo of his own face was tied to her loss. He felt it like a coal buried deep in his chest, glowing, waiting for the breath of time to fan it into flame. The warning. One evening, Miriam found him hunched over the desk, quill scratching, eyes hard. The ledger lay open, half filled with new symbols, the sketch of the rival still fresh in the margin. When she entered, he snapped the book shut instinctively, as though its very sight might wound her. But Miriam stepped forward, calm, her presence filling the room like low fire. She placed her hand upon the cover, not prying, only resting her fingers on the rough leather. Her eyes searched his with the patience of one who already knew what lay within. "You cannot keep the children from shadows," she whispered. Her voice was steady, yet it trembled at its edges with the weight of knowing. "You can only teach them how to walk through them." Zuriel's breath slowed, his jaw tight with resistance. "I will not let them be hunted." Miriam shook her head gently, her wheat gold hair brushing her shoulders in the lamplight. Her reply was simple, devastating in its truth. "They already are." Silence filled the study, heavier than stone. The oil portrait of the faceless soldier loomed above them, its eyes unblinking. Zuriel closed his hand over hers where it lay on the ledger, not in agreement, but in grim acknowledgement. The vineyard was fortress enough for the land, but for the children Frederik at military school, Elsa growing into a quiet, watchful girl, it might not be enough. And for the first time since he had set foot in Africa, Zuriel felt not the strength of the architect, but the fragility of a father, the settler's shadow. By 1939, the stillness of the Cape was threaded with tension. The mountains stood timeless, the vineyards ripened under the sun, and the sea still cast its silver light upon the coast. Yet every radio hummed with a darker rhythm, voices from across the ocean telling of Hitler's rise, of broken treaties, of the world sliding once more into fire. Farmers in Stellenbosch argued about prices, ships, and markets, but Zuriel listened differently. Where they heard politics, he heard patterns. Where they heard war, he heard prophecy. He had long expected this. He had written of it even before the voices of Berlin and London sharpened their words into weapons. The rival bloodline was stirring again, reaching as it always had for crowns, for empires, for dominion clothed in banners. In his ledger, he wrote with the precision of a prophet more than a farmer. "Empires fall, but shadows persist. Prepare the roots, not the branches, the hidden fortress." Estes wine farm thrived in those years, yet its fame was whispered rather than shouted. Barrels traveled under seal, delivered not by trade routes open to all, but by discreet channels, letters folded twice, payments traced through Geneva and Lisbon. To the world, Zuriel had withdrawn. To those who knew, he had ascended. The cellars, once deep, grew deeper. Men thought him obsessed with the aging of wine, but those who worked closest knew. Their master was preparing for more than vintages. Passages were carved into rock, chambers hidden behind racks of casks, tunnels that could shelter families or store weapons if the day came. By day, drills looked like harvest routines. Workers carried baskets in patterns that mirrored formations. Whistles disguised as calls for oxen became signals. Fires set in test pits flared as warnings to distant cottages. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew. This was more than a vineyard. This was a keep, a sanctuary, a stronghold shaped in the guise of pastoral beauty. The vines sang in the sun by day, alive with buzzing bees and laughter of children at play. But by night, they whispered war. The rustling leaves became the hiss of marching armies in Zuriel's ears, and the moonlight traced patterns across the rows like the lines of a map no one else could read. Foreshadow. One evening, Zuriel climbed the highest hill of Estes, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil as twilight bled across the valley. From there he could see the rows stretch endless and ordered, like soldiers standing at eternal attention. Beyond them, the sea shimmered red gold where the sun drowned itself upon the horizon. Behind him, on the whitewashed veranda, Miriam sat in her chair, her hands folded, her eyes steady upon him. She did not speak, but her gaze was watchful, as if she too felt the weight that pressed on the land. Below, Elsa laughed among the vines, chasing shadows between the trellises, her hair catching the last light like a crown of fire. Frederik was away at the academy, hardening into a man in another world, preparing for trials that even the strict discipline of generals could not anticipate. Zuriel knew the boy would return different. He also knew that no uniform, no parade ground honor, could prepare Frederik for the storm written in their blood. The air carried peace, but Zuriel's heart carried storm. He closed his eyes, the taste of iron, and earth filling his mouth, and whispered to the wind, "The bloodlines are moving." The vines rustled in reply as though they understood, as though the land itself had long been waiting for this acknowledgement, that what was planted was not only grape and wine, but covenant and war.